In the practical relationship which man establishes between himself and nature, he treats it as something immediate and external. He is himself an immediately external and therefore sensuous individual, who is nevertheless also justified in acting as purpose in the face of natural situations. Nature, viewed in the light of the relationship thus established, is seen from the finite teleological standpoint, which is based on the correct supposition that nature does not itself contain the absolute and ultimate end. Nevertheless, if this view is based on particular finite ends, it transforms them partly into presuppositions, the contingent content of which can by itself be insignificant and trivial. However, for itself the teleological relationship demands a deeper manner of comprehension than that appropriate to external and finite relationships. It thus opens the way for the notional point of view which is universally immanent, and therefore also immanent within nature. Addition. In general, the practical approach to nature is determined by the self-seeking of appetite. Need impels us to turn nature to our advantage, to exploit and harness, and in short to annihilate it. Two further determinations are immediately apparent here. A. The practical approach is only concerned with the individual products of nature, or with certain aspects of these products. Need and ingenuity have enabled man to discover endless, varied ways of mastering and making use of nature. Whatever powers nature develops and releases against him, cold, wild beasts, flood and fire, man knows how to counter them. He uses nature as a means of defeating nature. The nimbleness of his reason enables him to protect and preserve himself by pitting the objects of nature against the natural forces which threaten him, and so nullifying them. Nature itself, as it is in its universality, cannot be mastered in this manner, however, nor bent to the purposes of man. B. The other aspect of the practical approach is that our purpose overrides the objects of nature, so that they become means, the determination of which lies not in themselves, but in us. For example, when we turn food into blood. C. The outcome is our satisfaction and self-assertion, which had been disturbed by some kind of deficiency. The negation of myself, which is within me when I am hungry, is present at the same time as something to be consumed. I cancel this opposition by acting so as to make this other identical with myself. I sacrifice this something in order to restore my unity with myself. The teleological interpretation, which was formerly so popular, was certainly based on the relationship to spirit. It limited itself to external functionalism, however, and so confined the significance of spirit to finite and natural purposes. It has become discredited as a way of indicating the wisdom of God on account of the triviality of the finite purposes cited as evidence of the usefulness of natural objects. The notion of a purpose is not merely external to nature, as it is when I say that sheep bear wool only in order that I may clothe myself. Silly remarks of this kind are often made, as for example in the Xenia, where the wisdom of God is admired because he causes cork trees to grow that we might have bottle stoppers, herbs that we might cure disordered stomachs, and cinnabar that we might make ourselves up. To see purpose as inherent within natural objects is to grasp nature in its simple determinateness. For example, the seed of a plant, which contains the real potential of everything pertaining to the tree, and which as purposeful activity is therefore orientated solely towards self-preservation. Aristotle had already noticed this notion of purpose in nature, and he called the activity the nature of a thing, This is the true teleological view, for it regards nature in its proper animation as free, and is therefore the highest view of nature. Paragraph 246. What is now called physics was formerly called natural philosophy. It is what is more a theoretical and thinking consideration of nature, and while on the one hand it does not concern itself with determinations, such as these purposes, which are external to nature, on the other hand it does aim at comprehending that which is universal in nature, as it presents itself in a determinate form, that is to say, forces, laws, genera. Here the content is not a simple aggregate, but is distributed through orders and classes, and must be regarded as an organic whole, in that the philosophy of nature is a comprehending consideration. Its object is the same universal. It is, however, universal for itself, which it regards in its own immanent necessity, according to the self-determination of the notion. Remark. The relationship of philosophy to what is empirical was discussed in the general introduction. It is not only that philosophy must accord with the experience nature gives rise to, in its formation and in its development. Philosophic science presupposes and is conditioned by empirical physics. The procedure involved in the formation and preliminaries of a science is not the same as the science itself, however, for in this latter case it is no longer experience, but rather the necessity of the notion, which must emerge as the foundation. It has already been pointed out that in the procedure of philosophical cognition, the object has not only to be presented in its notional determination, the empirical appearance corresponding to this determination also has to be specified, and it has to be shown that the appearance does not in fact correspond to its notion. This is not, however, an appeal to experience in regard to the necessity of the content, an appeal to what has been called intuition, which was usually nothing more than a purveyance of random concepts by means of fanciful and even fantastic analogies, is even less admissible here. These analogies may have a certain value, but they can only impose determinations and schemata on the objects in an external manner. Addition. In the theoretical approach, A, the initial factor is our withdrawing from natural things, leaving them as they are, and adjusting to them. In doing this, we start from our sense knowledge of nature. If physics were based only on perceptions, however, and perceptions were nothing but the evidence of the senses, the activity of a natural scientist would consist only of seeing, smelling, hearing, etc. So that animals would also be physicists. It is, however, a spirit, a thinking entity, which sees and hears, etc. If we say that in the theoretical approach things are left as they are, we shall be referring only partly to the external senses, for these are themselves partly theoretical and partly practical. Only ideation or intelligence has this free relation to things. We can, of course, also look at them through the medium of the senses, but cognition will now be merely a means, not an end in itself. In the second relation of things, they either acquire the determination of universality for us, or we transform them into something universal. The more thought predominates, or in ordinary perceptiveness, so much the more does the naturalness, individuality, and immediacy of things vanish away. As thoughts invade the limitless multiformity of nature, its richness is impoverished, its springtimes die, and there is a fading in the play of its colours. That which in nature was noisy with life falls silent in the quietude of thought. Its warm abundance, which shaped itself into 1,000 intriguing wonders, withers into arid forms and shapeless generalities, which resemble a dull northern fog. But these determinations are opposed to both practical ones, and we also find that the theoretical approach is inwardly self-contradictory, for it appears to bring about the precise opposite of what it intends. We want to know the nature that really is, not something which is not, but instead of leaving it alone and accepting it as its truth, instead of taking it as given, we make something completely different out of it. By thinking things, we transform them into something universal. We make them into something subjective, produced by us, belonging to us, and of course peculiar to us as men. For the things of nature do not think, and are neither representations nor thought. In the second determination, which we have just considered, it is precisely this inversion which takes place, and consequently, what we have started upon may well seem to be impossible from the start. The theoretical approach begins by checking appetite. It is disinterested. It leaves things to subsist in their own way, and thus immediately displays two aspects, subject and object, the separation of which is fixed as this side and that. Our aim is rather to grasp and comprehend nature, however, to make it ours, so that it is not something beyond and alien to us. This is where the difficulty comes in. How are we as subjects to get over into the object? If we venture the leap over this gap, and while failing to find our footing, thinking that we have found nature, we shall turn that which is something other than we are into something other than what it is. Both theoretical relationships are also the precise opposites of one another. We turn things into universals or make them our own. Yet as natural things they should be free from themselves. This is the crux of the issue concerning the nature of cognition, and is the concern of philosophy. The philosophy of nature is in such a perilous condition, however, that it has to demonstrate its existence, and in order to justify it we shall have to trace it back to what is familiar. In this solution of the subject-object opposition, a specific shape may be noticed, which has been made known partly by science and partly by religion, in which it is, however, a past, and which readily overcomes the whole difficulty. The unification of both determinations is what is called the primal state of innocence, in which spirit is identical with nature, and the spiritual I stands immediately in the centre of nature. The standpoint of the division of consciousness is the fall of man from the eternal and divine unity. This unity is represented as a primal intuition, a ratiocination, which is at the same time a vision, forming and so rationalizing sensuous shapes. The intuitive reason is the divine reason, for we may say that God is that in which spirit and nature are one, and which intelligence at the same time has both being and shape. The eccentricities of the philosophy of nature have their basis partly in this idea, which implies that although people nowadays no longer find themselves in a state of paradise, there are still some on the sunny side of the hedge to whom God imparts the verities of cognition and science while they sleep, and that even if a man is not on that side of the hedge, he can transport himself thither merely by believing in the moments in which the secret of nature automatically becomes apparent to him, and allowing himself to have brain waves, so that by giving rein to his imagination he may give prophetic utterance to truth. Such a performance, which offers no further credentials, has been generally regarded as the consummation of scientific ability. What is more, it is also asserted that such a state of consummate science preceded the present history of the world, and that since our fall from this unity, some remnants and distant glimmerings of the state of spiritual light have remained with us in myths, traditions, and other fragments, onto which the subsequent religious culture of the human race has fashioned, and from which all scientific cognition has proceeded. If it were no more difficult than this for consciousness to know truth, but one had only to sit on a tripod and utter oracles, much of the labour of thought would certainly be spared. Nevertheless, in order to state clearly where the failing of such general conception lies, it must be admitted that there is something lofty in it, which at first sight seems highly promising. This unity of intelligence and intuition, of the being of self, of spirit, and its relation to externality, must however be the goal, not the beginning. It must be a unity which is brought forth, not one which is immediate. The natural unity of thought and intuition found in a child or in an animal is no more than a feeling. It is not spirituality. Man must have eaten of the tree of knowledge of good and evil. He must have gone through the labour and activity of thought in order to be what he is, that is, the subjugator of the separation of what is his from nature. That immediate unity is therefore merely abstract. It is the being in self of truth, not the actuality of it. Not only the content, but also that form must be true. The healing of the schism must have the shape of the form of knowing idea, and the moment of the healing must be sought in consciousness itself. It is not a matter of resorting to abstraction and vacuity and deserting knowledge. Consciousness must preserve itself, so that ordinary consciousness may itself overcome the assumptions out of which the contradiction arose. Theoretical consciousness, because of its one-sided assumption that the natural things over against us are persistent and impenetrable, creates a difficulty which is refuted point-blank by the practical approach, which displays the absolutely idealistic belief that individual things are nothing in themselves. In its relationship to things, appetite is defective, not because its attitude towards them is realistic, but because it is all too idealistic. Philosophically, valid idealism consists in nothing other than the determination that the truth of things lies in their immediate particularity or sensuousness, that they are in fact mere show or appearance. According to a metaphysics prevalent at the moment, we cannot know things because they are uncompromisingly exterior to us. It might be worth noticing that even the animals which go out after things, grab, maul, and consume them, are not so stupid as these metaphysicians. The same determination, that is, that we think natural objects, occurs in the second aspect of the theoretical approach already indicated. Intelligence does not, of course, familiarize itself with things in their material existence. In that it thinks them, it sets their content within itself, and to practical ideality, which for itself is mere negativity. It adds form, universality so to speak, and so gives affirmative determination to the negative of particularity. This universality of things is not something subjective and belonging to us. It is rather the noumenon as opposed to the transient phenomenon, the truth, objectivity, an actual being of the things themselves. It resembles the Platonic ideas, which do not have their being somewhere in the beyond, but which exist in individual things as substantial genera. Proteus will only be compelled into telling the truth if he is roughly handled, and we are not content with sensuous appearance. The inscription on the veil of Isis, I am what was, is, and shall be, and my veil has been lifted by no mortal. Melts before thought. Harman is therefore right when he says, nature is a Hebrew word, written only with consonants. It is left to the understanding to add the points. The empirical view of nature has this category of universality in common with the philosophy of nature, but it oscillates between regarding it as subjective and regarding it as objective, as one often hears that these classes and orders are only formulated for the convenience of cognition. This uncertainty is even more apparent when distinguishing features are looked for not because it is thought that they are the essential objective determinations of things, but because they are a convenient way for us to distinguish things. If there were nothing more to it than this, one could, for example, select the earlobe as a distinctive feature of humanity, for no animal has it. One feels immediately, however, that such determination is inadequate to the cognition of the essential nature of man. If the universal is determined as law, force, or matter, however, it will not be asserted that this is an external form, as subjective trimming. Objective reality is attributed to laws, forces are said to be immanent, and matter is taken to be the true nature of the fact. Something similar is also asserted of the genera, that is, that they are not such arranging together of that which is similar, an abstraction made by us, that they are not only have something in common, but that they are the peculiar inner essence of objects themselves. What is more, that the orders are not merely our mental vision, but form a graduated scale in nature itself. The distinguishing features are claimed to be the universal, the substantial element of the genus. Physics regards these universals as its triumph, and it is unfortunately true to say that too much of its activity is concerned with such universalization. The current philosophy is called the philosophy of identity. It might be much more appropriate to apply this name to this kind of physics, which simply dispenses with determinateness. Contemporary electrochemistry, in which magnetism, electricity and chemism are regarded as one and the same thing, is a good example. It is a fault in physics that it should involve much identity, for identity is the basic category of the understanding. The material prepared out of experienced biophysics is taken by the philosophy of nature at the point to which physics has brought it, and reconstituted without any further reference to experience as the basis of verification. Physics must therefore work together with philosophy, so that the universalized understanding which it provides may be translated into the notion by showing how this universal as an intrinsically necessary whole proceeds out of the notion. The philosophical manner of presentation is not arbitrary. It does not stand on its head for a while because it has got tired of using its legs, nor does it paint up its everyday face just for a change. The ways of physics are not adequate to the notion, and for that reason advances have to be made. The philosophy of nature distinguishes itself from physics on account of the metaphysical procedure it employs, for metaphysics is nothing but the range of universal thought determinations, and is, as it were, the diamond net into which we bring everything in order to make it intelligible. Every cultured consciousness has its metaphysics, its instinctive way of thinking. This is the absolute power within us, and we shall only master it if we make it the object of our knowledge. Philosophy in general, as philosophy, has different categories from those of ordinary consciousness. All cultural change reduces itself to a difference of categories. All revolutions, whether in the sciences or world history, occur merely because spirit has changed its categories, in order to understand and examine what belongs to it, in order to possess and grasp itself in a truer, deeper, more intimate and unified manner. The inadequacy of the thought determinations used in physics may be traced to two very closely connected points. A. The universal of physics is abstract or simply formal. Its determination is not immanent within it and does not pass over into particularity. B. This is precisely the reason why its determinate content is external to the universal and is therefore split up, dismembered, particularized, separated, and lacking in any necessary connection with itself, why it is in fact merely finite. Take a flower, for example. The understanding can note its particular qualities, and chemistry can break it down and analyze it. Its color, the shape of its leaves, citric acid, volatile oil, carbon, hydrogen, etc., can be distinguished, and we then say that the flower is made up of all these parts. Échappée natura, chemistry calls it, mocks itself, knows what befalls it, holds the parts within its hand, but lacks, alas, the spiritual band, as Goethe says. Spirit cannot be confined to this procedure of the reflective understanding. There are two possible ways out. When nature is viewed to be alive and open mind, as it is in the apt and ineffectual manner we find so often in Goethe, this mind feels the life and the universal relatedness within nature. It has a presentiment of the universe as an organic whole, a rational totality, just as it experiences an inner unity with itself through the living individual. We can assemble all the separate constituents of the flower, but this will not make the flower. Intuition has therefore been reinstated in the philosophy of nature and set above reflection. But this gets us nowhere, because one cannot philosophize on the basis of intuition. B. Intuition has to be submitted to thought, so that what has been dismembered may be restored to simple universality through thought. This complicated unity is the notion which contains the determinate differences simply as an immanent and self-moving unity. Philosophic universality is not indifferent to the determinations. It is the self-fulfilling universality, the diamantine identity, which at the same time holds difference within itself. True infinity is the unity of itself and the finite. It is the category of philosophy, and also therefore of the philosophy of nature. If the genera and forces constitute the inwardness of nature, and as opposed to this universal, what is outward and particular is ephemeral, a third stage is required, the inwardness of this inwardness. This, according to what has been said, would be the unity of the universal and the particular. Into nature's inwardness. O you Philistine, no created spirit still. I ask you never to remind me and mine of sayings of this kind. We think, and here and there we find the centre everywhere. The sweet of mortal blessedness is to taste the outer peel. For 60 years they've told it me, I've learned to curse them silently. But tell me till the shadows fall, all riches from its bounties pour. Nature has neither rind nor core. but everything is found in all. Look to yourself and only find whether you are core or rind. When this inwardness is grasped, the one-sidedness of the theoretical and practical approaches is transcended, and at the same time justice is done to both determinations. The one contains the universality without a determinateness, the other a particularity without universality. Notional apprehension stands between the two, where universality is not personal, and so opposed to the particularity of objects, but relates itself negatively to things and assimilates them, and while eliciting their particularity leaves them alone and allows them to determine themselves freely within it. Notional comprehension is therefore the unity of the theoretical and practical approaches. The negation of particularity, a negation of the negative, is affirmative universality, which gives subsistence to the determinations, for true particularity is at the same time universality in itself. Objections may be raised, of course, to this standpoint. One might ask how the universal comes to determine itself, or how the infinite issues forth from finitude. In concrete terms, this is the question of the creation of the world by God, in which God is imagined to be a subject, an actuality for himself, and divorced from the world. If such abstract infinitude and universality were external to singularity, however, it would itself only be one side of the matter, and therefore finite and singular. The insensibility of the understanding consists in its precise cancellation of the determination which it establishes, and so in its doing the opposite of what it intends. The singular is supposed to be separated from the universal, but it is precisely on account of this separateness that it is posited within the universal, so that what is present is merely the unity of the universal and the particular. God has two revelations, as nature and as spirit, and both manifestations are temples which he fills, and which he is present. God as an abstraction is not the true God. His truth is the positing of this other, the living process, the world, which is his Son, which, when it is comprehended in the divine form. God is subject only in unity with his other in spirit. The determination and the purpose of the philosophy of nature is therefore that spirit should find its own essence, its counterpart, that is, the notion within nature. The study of nature is therefore the liberation of what belongs to spirit within nature, for spirit is in nature insofar as it relates itself not to another but to itself. This is likewise the liberation of nature, which in itself is reason. It is only through spirit, however, that reason as such comes forth from nature into existence. Spirit has the certainty which Adam had when he beheld Eve. This is flesh of my flesh, this is bone of my bones. Nature is, so to speak, the bride espoused by spirit. Is this certainty also truth, however? The inwardness of nature is nothing but the universal, and we enter it of our own accord, if we have thoughts. If subjective truth is the correspondence between sensuous representation and the object, objective truth is the correspondence of the object, of the fact, with itself, so that its reality is the conformity with the notion. The essential ego is the self-equality of the notion, which pervades everything, and which, through maintaining its control over particular differences, constitutes the universal returning into itself. This notion is, on this account, the true idea of the universe, the sole actuality. Thus God alone is truth, according to Plato. He is that which is immortally alive, and his body and soul are by nature one. The first question to arise is, therefore, why has God determined himself in order to create nature?